Previously on Detour Hotel.
There was another guy that you need to know about. A lot like this one. I can't give any real details because I wasn't here that day. You'll have to ask Ren. I'm sorry. She tossed her items into her crossbody bag, swallowed the vitamin, and stood. Chapter 9. Harper carefully gripped the metal banister as he took the stairs to the second-floor apartment. It was a misty winter evening with cones of orange forming around the sodium vapor streetlights of East Nashville. He looked at his feet as he took each step. He felt like hell. Head throbbing, knees aching. This apartment complex was a fitting place to be in that case. Not a true tenement, but it had seen a lot of better days. He surveyed the hallway at the top of the stairs. Bags of trash were outside of each apartment door. These bags must have been a common decoration. The floor was stained an awful brown-black from years of leaking refuse. A fluorescent light reflected in post-storm puddles near the first door. Apartment 26 was on the inner breezeway. There were dents in the door and a small sticker under the peephole read, Dvorak. Harper adjusted his belt and knocked 3 rapid strikes. It was nearly 6 o'clock. 6 was always the guaranteed time that a hangover would be done with in his experience. It was too warm to be wearing gloves, yet he flexed his fingers inside of their pleasant confines. "Are you a cop?" a voice yelled from inside. "Metro PD, sort of. I'm a detective. I'm investigating a suspicious death today at Sandbox. Heard you work there." A truck blew its horn on the pike below. "Maybe I do. So what?" the woman yelled again. "I want to know more about the establishment. Not just what happened there today. I don't really know much about the simulated world." He saw the shades across the hall flicker and heard the door lock click. Birds had made nests all along the soffit on the east side of the building. Lazy sprigs of collected hay wafted in the breeze. "Fine. You might not like what I have to say," the voice on the other side of the door yelled. Harper put his hands on his hips and thought about how to frame his investigation. "I need to get a statement, but I also want to know about what an experience is, why somebody might have one, why it might be worth killing somebody over." Rin opened the door and pushed her wavy black hair back behind her ears. She smiled and put her cheek against the doorframe. "One shouldn't end a sentence with a preposition," she told him. "Why it might be worth killing somebody over, ma'am." Good one. "All right, what can I do for you, officer?" "I understand you're an experienced architect with Sandbox." Yep, I am." She squeezed the knob of the door as she spoke, shoeless, sober, backlit by Christmas lights that had been spangled across the inside of the apartment. "What's your name?" she demanded. "Captain Roy Harper." "Captain Roy Harper. Which of those 3 is the name I should use when addressing you?" He breathed out casually through his mouth as he nearly cracked a smile. "I suppose it's Harper. Were you at work this afternoon?" "I suppose I was. I left a little bit ago." She waved the door back and forth and looked at her feet. "Your name is Ren. My name's Ren. But yeah, if we're talking about like what's on my driver's license, then a little old Kimmy Hitchcock." "Did you come right back here after you left the experience salon?" "I did. This is my home," she said. 2 small birds soared through the breezeway and landed in the complex of nests above the stairwell. "Well, Ren, this afternoon a man named Clayton Doyle expired while having an experience in Sandbox. Your associate, Mike Stern, told us that you worked up Doyle prior to clocking out. We just want to create a high-quality timeline of events for our investigation. He'll undergo a post-mortem to determine cause of death," Harper explained. "They'll find out why he expired." "Correct. Were you aware that Mr. Doyle had passed away?" "No, that's shocking." Rin straightened a black lace choker about her neck. To the best of your knowledge, do you know of other instances in which patients have expired while having an experience? She rolled her eyes. We don't call them patients. If we like them, we call them travelers, and if we don't like them, we call them mooks or creeps. Do you know of any mooks, creeps, or travelers that have expired while within an experience? He repeated himself. You know, it's cold out here, isn't it? Come inside. Harper disagreed, but was quickly whisked inside the apartment. Rin zipped the jittery chain lock closed and spun to face Harper. I heard of one guy for sure dying. Anything else has just been a horror story. Campfire tales, she told him. Her apartment smelled like ginger and hard water. A tattered wad of Tibetan prayer flags hung from the corner of a bookcase constructed of cinder block and plywood. There were hundreds of graphic novels and coffee table books of art on the shelves. Burroughs, Philip K. Dick, J.G. Ballard, Man Ray. Rin saw Harper examining the books. You like this one, The Quran. It's a romantic comedy. She handed him a worn-out copy. He turned it over and put it down on the tiny last chance table near the door. This other confirmed death. Do you know what happened? He asked her. A guy last year in Norfolk had an aneurysm. They said it was unrelated. It could have happened to anyone. She crossed her arms and squeezed her feet together on the pink-flecked topography of the foyer's linoleum. How much do you know about Doyle? How often he came in? What experiences he had? That sort of thing. Harper looked around for a place to sit, but the couch was heaped with laundry, mostly monochromatic t-shirts and tank tops. The entire place couldn't have been 700 square feet. He was a regular, for sure. He came in maybe once a week. He was comfortable with a real sandbox, something simple. I don't know if this will come off as shitty, but he was not a good person. How do you mean? Harper asked. He was a total creep. He wasn't nice when he came in and he never tipped. He always jerked off when he was in there. That'll give you an idea of the experiences he was having. Harper took off his gloves and put them in the pockets of his jacket. Are experiences of a sexual nature allowed in the simulations? Experiences of a sexual nature are the main reason we're in business, she said. Is that something you can buy? I'm not really up on the legislation of these businesses, he asked. He put his hands on his hips to regain some semblance of control in this uncomfortable conversation. Rin fidgeted with the hem of her polka dot dress and snickered. Most people want something pre-created to start out with, like a tutorial. Going to the moon or fighting in World War II or something. It's like what happens in Total Recall, but not that immersive. You control what you're looking at, but not much else. Something sexual might happen in that environment, but it's unlikely until you've gotten a mastery over the process. It's totally PG, choose your own adventure sort of thing. So, a normal person would get Indiana Jones or something like that, Harper asked. There are no normal people. Some people like to come in and have experiences. Some people like to get tied up and tickled or go to conventions for people who enjoy wearing diapers. You name it, somebody does it, she said. Harper paced a circle and inspected the apartment as Rin continued. So yeah, most people use Sandbox like the movies. They come in and see what we create for them. The people that get really into experiencing end up preferring the true Sandbox, a blank room. That's because 1, it's cheaper, and 2, it allows for total manifestation without object interference. You wouldn't believe the things you could dream up in a plain white room. I bet I couldn't, he replied. He was fixated on a misshapen block of wood that had been spray painted entirely silver. It was the size of a tree stump, and it was sitting in what appeared to be the geometrically calibrated center of the living room. Polly would have lost her mind at the thought of such a blatant tripping hazard. He felt like the thing was looking at him. You want a drink? She dangled a transparent plastic sack of red liquid. Harper blinked his eyes. Is that an IV full of blood? She laughed. Once a box wine gets low, I yank the sack out of there. It's easier to get the last drops out. Think outside the box, she said. She turned the bag up and squeezed a squirt into her mouth. I've been trying to drink less, he told her. She shrugged her shoulders and shoved the bag back into the cabinet. Good for you. Why? Well, I lost someone close to me, and I suppose that Drinking might have had something to do with it. She nodded her head. I used to drink. I still do, but I used to drink too. She had pictures of kittens taped up to the wall of her kitchen. Dishes were clean but not put away. All her succulents were dead. One of them had plastic googly eyes on it. Mike said that there was a way to determine what Doyle was experiencing when the trauma occurred. Were there encrypted recordings? How long would it even take to get these recordings? Harper asked her. He reached out to touch an elaborate dream catcher hanging over the kitchen door. Do you want to try it? She asked. Harper looked up at her. I don't want any wine, no. Do you want to try the sandbox? She rephrased the question. Harper looked around the room. I don't think it's my sort of thing. It is your sort of thing. You lost someone close to you. There are literally dozens of people that come in just to have experiences with people that are dead or long gone. Someone that's dead? How much does it cost? She clenched her hands with excitement and stepped forward into the spotlight cast by the track lighting of the empty dining room. I'll set it up for free. It's part of your investigation. Plus, it's a test for me. What do you mean, a test for you? She looked at the alligator tattoo on the top of her bare left foot and further composed her proposition. I know what I have to do. I have to help you. You're saying that it'll be relevant because I'm using the experience to try and investigate what it was like for Mr. Doyle, Harper asked her. She mulled his summary and ultimately agreed. Yes. And I'll watch and try to learn more about who you were. Harper looked around the apartment and tried to understand whether to trust her. Is this a sort of environment where you could make unknown connections, like with your subconscious? I've heard of this with, what's it called? Transcendental meditation? Yeah, sure. I prefer acupuncture, but that's neither here nor there. He couldn't make up his mind. Something about the entire thing creeped him out. The process had likely killed Doyle. People did this sort of thing every day. The desire for him to see Kara Ann was strong no matter the venue. He was torn between this shortcut to absolution and the nagging feeling that maybe he didn't deserve such a thing. Ren stood before him, studying him, forcing a snap decision with a palpably anxious vibe. How much information do I need to give you? You don't know anything about how this works, do you? She pulled on a sweatshirt and wrestled with the sleeves. Oh, I kept a pretty clean record up until this point, he said. She shook her head. Impossible. There's no such thing as a secret anymore. You got data. I can use admin rights to pull as much as I can from the internet. Harper rubbed his eyes and took a deep breath. What do you need me to do? I'll show you. Hey, look. She stepped over and squeezed his hand. You're incomplete. It's a terrible thing to miss someone. I understand where you're coming from. Her touch shocked him to a boiling lucidity. He had met her before, he was certain. Many times, perhaps. He couldn't pin down the source of this familiarity. Her ice blue eyes were strongly dilated. The freckles under her eyes suggested a vague mischievousness. He shook her hand, free from his. I suppose you're right. I need to get a more formal statement from you, however. Yeah. She spun, her septum piercing, and looked at the floor. He dug around in his pockets for a pen. I need your date of birth and a telephone number, he said. She fussed and turned her back to him. Oh, you were doing so good. We were starting to have a real connection. She kicked a folded pair of jeans across the living room. It's just for basic contact information. I don't personally want to know this stuff. She lowered her shoulders and unloaded. Fine. You know my name and address. My birthday is 8/30/92. My number is 6,155,553,002. Harper looked up from his notes. She had picked up a comic book and was leafing through it. She seemed to flicker around the edges with intense primary color gleams, her barely moving lips telegraphing a word in a forgotten language that meant both friend and guide. And her wavy hair seemed to grow longer as she threw down the comic book and held out her hand. Did you take good notes, Detective? He looked down at the indecipherable mess on his notepad. I guess not. I can't read any of this. He looked back at the silver wooden block in the middle of the room. It sparkled gently with the reflected colors of the Christmas lights. Now that he'd gotten used to it, the thing wasn't as off-putting as he thought. He could focus on it. He reached out and took her hand once again. There you go. Come on. Let's try a simulation. Chapter 10. Rin flipped on the lights to reveal the empty lobby of Sandbox. Indoor plants hid in the shadows, and the numerically shaped neon signs above each salon door buzzed to life. She pulled off her sweatshirt and threw it onto the desk. Harper turned a nervous circle as she booted the server. "It just takes a second," she told him. She scanned a keycard and entered a brief command at the console. "Take this in the meantime." She handed him a dull orange pill. "And this is?" She peered up at him and smiled. "It's a vitamin. It's good for you. It's like a soft little everlasting gobstopper. Been a while since I thought about that." He poked the slick orb to find that it was firmer than he expected. "It could have made it a more appetizing color." "Eat the stupid thing. The simulation's ready." He shrugged and palmed the vitamin into his mouth. He wiped his nose and examined the tidy front desk. "Step into salon number 2, Rin said. She walked over and let the door of the salon swing open for him. He put his hands in his pockets and entered. Irregular motes of dust floated through the air. "I'm having the system render a living room for you based on a few pictures from your wife's social media pages. I'll stay here throughout the experience, but I'll be cloaked so that I don't distract you." He sneered at the rapid-fire nature of the routine. "All right, I guess I'm ready." Harper spun around as he examined the smoky gray walls of the salon. The scene was industrial, sterile. The place reminded him of an interrogation room, but not like one that he'd used in professional life, more like the ones that he'd seen in network television shows. The setting was sparse, drop-tile ceiling and nothing on the walls, meant to be minimally intrusive on the senses, he figured. "Right here," Rin said. She slapped the seat of the chair to entice him to sit. He reluctantly took off his jacket and put it on the hook on the back of the door. "I already feel sort of sleepy. What's in this vitamin?" "It's mostly plant matter and magnesium, but like 99% plant matter." He rubbed his nose and sat down in the chair. She started to tap away at the control module as he adjusted his seating. He used one foot to kick the shoe from the other. Rin's appearance washed out to a blurry version of a human figure. "What's the other 1%? He asked. He felt as though he was falling forward in waves, gaining transparency. "Count up for me starting from 1 until you're not counting anymore," she instructed him. 1, 2, 3, 4, he said to himself. She adjusted the sphere around his head as he took a deep breath and continued counting. She lifted his wrists and placed them on the armrests. 7, 8, 9, 10. He stopped. There was no 11. He hadn't been counting at all. He was in the living room of his old bungalow in Sylvan Park. He settled down into his full weight and gasped a lungful of smoggy post-breakfast air. The microwave above the oven hadn't vented outside, and Polly had always insisted that the thing be run at full blast the second anything became smoky, despite Roy's increasingly resigned reminders of the uselessness of the fan. His toes flexed within his shoes. The grandfather clock was ticking. He reached out and touched the top of the chair at the head of the dining table. Layers of beveled wood created oval rings on the knobs. He ran his thumb across the texture. There were black damask placemats haphazardly arranged on the table, matching cushions on each chair tied loosely to the frame. Mail was sitting on the mantel. The lamp, shaped like a Siamese cat, was glowing. The whole rendering was so precise that he could tell that it was about 1 p.m. on a day in late spring. A weekday. He couldn't see them, but there were dozens of ranunculi on the other side of the south wall, a blend of corms that Polly had purchased from the home improvement store. The blend was called Taffy, and they'd rehydrated them in that awful chartreuse salad bowl. A sizzling sound grew in intensity behind him. I put up an object reference for you. From now on, that'll be Kara Ann. She She had about 16 hours of Facebook Live videos to pull personality data from, which is 15 more than we needed. She should be very high quality. It made the house look nice too, Rin's voice said. Her transparent outline was the source of the sizzle. He could see a mild, blurry deformation around the edges of her form that reminded him of the cloaked version of the Predator. Her words sounded as though she were the public address announcer at a baseball game. She was only creating impressions in this world. She didn't seem to be in it. There was an off-white mannequin near the front window. "Is that the object reference?" he asked. That's Kara Ann," Rin told him. "So I just stick her on this thing." Harper gestured at the plain figure. Rin's outline was gone. Was she still in here with him? He heard a loud click. "No sticking necessary. Look again." Harper blinked, focused, and reeled. "Hi, Dad," Kara Ann said. She was wearing a white V-neck shirt and jeans, hair cut to shoulder length, Monroe piercing, tiny black flip-flops, neck set back from her clavicles like her mother, perfect in every detail down to midnight blue nail polish and flecks of brown in her glassy green eyes. Harper was nauseous with disbelief. "When's Mom gonna be home?" Kara Ann asked. She pulled her phone from her pocket and checked her messages. Chapter 11. Kara Ann Harper was born on the 1st of August of the year 2000. Her favorite foods contained apples. Anything with apples. Apples on pancakes. Apples dipped in caramel. She had pajamas with cartoon apples on them. She had a birthmark on her left ankle in the shape of Saturn. Polly claimed that it looked like a whale. When she was 9, she broke her leg when she fell out of a tree. The cast was bright green, like a Granny Smith, Polly remarked, Kara Ann's least favorite type of apple. Her 5th grade report card explained that she did not use her time wisely. She fidgeted. She didn't apply herself. She intermittently sucked her thumb until she was nearly 10 years old, a habit that Roy consistently brought up at his own doctor's appointments, as if her little right thumb being wrinkly and her having a couple of possibly impacted bicuspids was somehow a valid indicator of an approaching heart attack. "It sure ain't helping anything," he'd said when the nurse practitioner had asked him if he felt that it was having psychosomatic effects. Her platinum blonde hair wrapped around her heart-shaped face in her 8th grade pictures. Humid days made her head hurt. She wanted to move to California, though she always referred to it as Cali. Roy seemed to remember a charming photo of her taken in the breeze-swept vestibule of the Belmead Kroger, a place they'd spent nearly an hour of every Sunday of her early life. Her hair in the photo was wild, blown left to right by November winds, and her mittened left hand was flailed out to a full extent as if electrified, the right safely in Roy's fatherly grasp. He held her hand often in public. It had been an effective way of keeping that damned thumb out of her mouth. Rawlings had a son that was born within 2 weeks of Kara Ann. He had joked at the time that he only had to worry about one boy, but Harper had to worry about every boy in the world. As much as they'd laughed at that bullshit anecdote, Roy pushed himself into worrisome sicknesses as she got older, and it proved somewhat true. Kara Ann had a bizarre appetite for smooth talk and sleights of hand. She fancied herself some savvy country girl with a wisdom beyond her years, an old soul that could fall into good times. Roy understood it to be just the opposite. Her mind wandered. She was unwaveringly naive. As his only child, he dwelled on her safety and spent much of his 30s focusing on how to protect her. Within the experience, she stepped forward, and Roy wrapped her up in an enormous hug, a cathartic hug. The fabric of her shirt gave a rough whisper as she pulled away. "Wow, Dad, I missed you. I know it's crazy running into you like this, but I have to say, I love you so much." Roy was dizzy. He squeezed her hands. I love you too." Though she'd rarely said such things, teenagers never do, he was easily able to suspend disbelief in this medium. He was eager to do so. "How'd you find me here?" she asked him. Outside on the street, the mail truck trundled around the corner. "I thought I'd come back by the old house." He didn't know what to tell her. He was struck by the fantasy. The short, brown shag carpet. There ought to be a crack in the window above the sink. He turned and looked. The crack was there, bisecting the bottom right corner of the glass. "When did you get home?" he asked. "I don't know, a little while ago. I want to tell you a joke." Harper smiled and wiped his eyes. "All right, let me have it." "Why did the chicken cross the road?" "To get to the other side." "No, to get to the idiot's house. Knock, knock." She crossed her arms. "Who's there?" "The chicken." She leaned in and yelled at him, tipping her head to the side with playful force. Harper chuckled. "That's not nice, Carrie-Anne." "I'm not nice," she said. She turned and pointed out the front window. "There are goldfinches in the sunflowers. Mom's gonna be mad." He leaned over to look, but he couldn't see that far away. "See?" she asked. He shook his head. "I don't have my glasses on, but hey, Carrie-Anne, I know it's silly, but bear with me. I want another hug." He lurched forward and took her in his arms. She was as warm as a blanket that had been lying in the sun. "All right already," she said into his muffled chest. He squeezed her tight as he shed tears into the soft mat of her hair. He stared out the window behind her. Maple keys were raining down on the driveway. It couldn't be told how much time elapsed before they eventually parted. Seasons could have passed. Roy couldn't stand to let her go, for fear of the darkness into which she'd again dissolve. Carrie-Anne straightened her shirt and asked him a question as she stepped away from him. "Did you know that I had a big brother?" Harper stared back at her. "I don't think you did." "He lived across the hall from me," she said. Harper leaned back and scoffed at her claim. "I think I'd know about you having a brother," Harper chuckled. Wren felt a twist of regret. The simulation was breaking up. Carrie-Anne looked at Wren's concealed position and winked at her. She smiled and spoke to her father. "He was murdered," Carrie-Anne said. Wren gasped and looked away. She was losing control. She rubbed her eyes to find that her hands had fallen to static. Her leg jumped in a violent impulse and the simulation faded to a distant bright spot. Harper washed away to mist. She was immediately aware of the experience salon, her body lying at a 32-degree angle, her legs restrained. She gasped for breath as she clumsily wiped a wet streak of mascara-gray tears from her left cheek. Chapter 12. Sergeant Wells hopped out of his cruiser and sprinted toward the woman sitting on the metal railing. It was early Monday morning, January 30th, 45 degrees. He'd crept up on the scene from the East Nashville abutment of the Woodland Street bridge. This woman had been walking along the sidewalk in pajamas, shoeless, clutching herself against the cold. She was being followed at a crawl by an older Honda Accord with a man inside. He was yelling at her through the passenger window. Sergeant Wells kept his distance until it became clear that there was an altercation. She was screaming and pointing in the window. They were near the middle of the span. The belligerent car swerved and climbed the curb, and the woman jumped back to avoid being struck. Wells put on his blue lights and whooped the car with the siren. The car took off toward downtown, and the woman began to give chase. At that moment, Wells had to decide. He watched the car accelerate away from the woman's futile pursuit. The other side of the bridge was Central Precinct territory, 415. Wells was assigned to East Precinct, 227 specifically, and he was already out of position in 413. That ceased to matter when he saw the woman grab the iron railing of the bridge and jump up to sit on the edge. 90 feet below was the frosty, lapping surface of the Cumberland River. He skidded to a stop and muttered to himself as he wrestled with the seatbelt. Woodland Street doesn't have a traditional up-and-down span due to the higher embankment on the western landing. It's a gradual upslope with significant rust settling into the demure causeway decking, typical of mid-century brutalist transportation design. Wells pulled the emergency brake and consciously dismissed his apprehension at letting the vehicle and the threatening man inside go free. As Wells jogged up to meet the woman, she casually addressed him, strawberry blonde hair buffeted by frigid winds, locked arms holding herself from the precipice. "About time you showed up, Blue," she said with the keen vocal fry of a smoker who's been crying. Wells walked over and reached out a helping hand. "Come on down, he's gone." She gripped the handrail and spun down to hang precariously over the river. Wells gasped and tried to grab her. She hung by a few bloodless fingertips. Whorls of black water listed below. "Don't touch me! Let me be!" she yelled back up to him. Wells took a step back and rubbed his forehead. "Come on up from there, let's start this over," he begged. "Don't you wish you could start over that easy?" He could only see the white crescent moons of her fingernails gripping the chipped paint of the railing. His heart was pounding. He considered making a call for backup, but would that upset her? Would she jump if he called for backup? He looked back at the span of the roadway. No one for half a mile in either direction. "You don't know what you came upon tonight," she said to him. She swayed ever so slightly in her stasis. Her pattern of speech suggested a benign Alabama accent. Mobile, maybe, though she'd say it mobile. She was no older than 30, slim, 5'4", with dark, wide-set eyes. "I guess I don't. What did I come upon here tonight?" he stammered. She groaned as she pulled herself up to the railing and hoisted herself back up to a seated position. She exhaled a relieved breath and shot daggers at Wells. He was close enough that if they both reached out, they could touch fingertips. "Don't you come an inch closer to me or I'm heading down to them rocks." "Okay. So I think you'll know where I'm coming from on this one, Blue." She relaxed her shoulders and balanced on the railing. "You don't get to choose when you get a gun pointed your direction, do you?" Wells shook his head no. 1056 Woodland Street Bridge, Code 2, he quickly said into his radio. She looked out at the glow of the city. The gentle pulse of red aviation warning lights twinkled atop the downtown towers. The Korean Vets Bridge was illuminated green for a cause that Wells couldn't identify. The woman cleared her throat and spoke again. "The man in that car was my boyfriend. He thinks he's still my boyfriend. I don't know what you'd call it. My captor? I suppose if you run our info, you'll see a whole bunch of complaints, restraining orders and whatnot. Neighbors barely even call the cops anymore. It didn't seem to matter when they did. Here I am again, jumping out of a moving car, running across town like a maniac, trying to get away. Ice cold, screaming like a crazy woman." She trailed off. Wells took a step forward. "What about the gun pointing? Did he threaten you?" She laughed. "Threaten me? Jesus. Last week, for instance, he comes home and he's super pissed that I backed into the driveway. Thinks I'm hiding something. Trying to be able to pull out faster, I guess. He accuses me of trying to get away from him. He threw me on the bed and held my face down against the pillows and sat on me. He held a shotgun against the back of my head for nearly an hour. Held me face down. He swore all kinds of crazy shit that he'd done was my fault. He was real fucked up. You just gotta let it pass at that point. A man that fucked up stronger than 7. You ever breathe through a sweated out pillow, Blue? It seems like you're gonna die for a few minutes, but you can settle down and breathe through it. It's enough to keep you alive. It ain't like it is in movies where somebody gets smothered with a pillow and they fight for like 10 seconds. You can make it a long time. Wells furrowed his eyebrows. You should have called the police. She brushed her tongue back and forth against the back of her teeth. Her hair shook in the breeze. She had a shallow chin with a small dimple and a broadly sloped nose with a tiny stud in the right nostril. Dark circles under her eyes corroborated her story. I suppose I could have. I've done it before. But come from that spot, my world was awfully small. Every friend I made, every drop of water, every breath of air was numbered, and he counted. He'd take it away. He might kill me for calling the cops. He might kill me for this right here eventually if I don't jump. I don't know. I got to think him over at the gas station a few minutes ago. He was inside getting whatever bullshit that he drinks. I thought, girl, you ought to just run. Anything that you can feel that don't involve him is freedom. Maybe that freedom's being dead. Maybe it's the quiet of this bridge. She kicked her feet as she talked to him. Wells, rapt, rubbed his running nose. This is the turning point. We'll get you some help. Don't waste your time, she said. What do you get out of this? Whether I jump down there and drown in the river, I come with you and get shitty coffee from the precinct and you wrap some blanket around me, it don't change it. I blew out blood vessels in my eyes trying to get my breath while he choked me for whatever he thought I did while he was away 1,000-odd times. Y'all weren't there then. Y'all were there when he made me stick his bag of crack where the sun don't shine during a traffic stop. I'd have handed it over and gotten arrested. That would have been the smart thing to do. I'd have been safe in jail. I was too stupid to realize that getting arrested was a pretty viable way out. But of course y'all didn't do a cavity search. I guess it's for the grace of God that you showed up here to watch me jump tonight then. Wells winced and shook his head. You got a lot ahead of you. You're young. There's so many good things to look forward to. It's hard to see that in his shadow. But every moment comes one after the other. One step at a time you make it through things. She shook her head in retaliation. Isn't that right? There's so many good things out there that even God can't destroy it all at once. There ain't no oblivion, not like you think there is. Wells hesitantly agreed. He sheepishly hated himself for saying something as trite as every moment comes one after the other. It reminded him of the terrible, repetitive platitudes of AA. As a child, Wells had repeated words to himself until they lost all meaning, until they were only arbitrary assemblages of letters, hysterically random seeming. The word dinosaur had fallen to pieces after 100 mental scrutinies, as had finger and bath and earth. The AA schlock was the exact opposite of that. It didn't make sense until you blasted crap like, today's the first day of the rest of your life, to dust in your head. Underneath it all was the truth of that blind repetition, that life was blind repetition. Life was often meaningless. Life was to be scrutinized until you realized that you were just doing things, and you didn't even want to know why anymore. You just did the things that you were supposed to do or else be destroyed by the drink or the drugs or whatever devil you were into. Wells had once thrown his "To Thine Own Self Be True" blue enamel AA medallion from a similar bridge into a different river, the Brazos, doing so not because he'd failed to take it one day at a time, but that after 100 days of sobriety, he'd realized the bleak truth of these idioms, the self-maintaining perpetuity of the program, of sobriety, of the continuation of life in general. The coin was a manacle, the ball and chain of a boring man. He had cathartically sent it sailing into the night. His second daughter was born 3 days later, and he'd maintained a cautious sobriety by denying that he was a sober person. No coins, no program, no meaningless mantras. He was just Eddie Wells. He vociferously hated that definition by alternative. The memory of the Brazos allowed him to harness an agitated flow of truth to deliver to this woman, if for anything else to forgive himself for the shallow rhetoric that he'd mindlessly applied. He'd been afraid. When he was afraid, it reminded him of being drunk, or even worse, being hungover. His lips quivered as he put his hands on his hips. Look here, I scooped up dead bodies dozens of times. I pulled kids out of sex trafficking rings. I've held a gun to a guy's head, and it was a guy a lot worse than that asshole you got living with you. I've seen oblivion, a super detailed oblivion. I saw my own father destroy himself real slow. He whipped us kids like he was trying to kill somebody. Maybe it was himself he was thinking of when he whipped us. But you know what? There's beauty in the face of all of it. It ain't all man's world to destroy. We build things up too. Wells wiped his mouth and put one hand on his radio. Bless your heart. Bless your heart for having to see me in this sorry state, she said. Wells quickly interrupted her. All right then, come on. I'm tired of all this. It's cold out here. He shuffled his feet a few inches closer to her. Your daddy. What was his thing? Drinking? Wells thought of his father in his giant frame, his ragged breathing after he'd whipped Eddie and his sister with the belt, demanding their total silence or else the barrage would continue. Vodka, mostly. Mine too. Guess we're best buddies now, huh? Wells took an earnest step forward and reached out for the woman's arm. She shied away and jumped down to hang from the railing once again. She swung wildly with the inertia of her fall. I told you I ain't going with you, she yelled up at him. Spiderwebs in the trusses of the bridge waved in the wind. He gripped the railing inches from her hands. She looked up at him in the waning moonlight. "You gonna make me come down there and drag your body out of the river?" "I'd have to do it. I got kids, you know." She didn't respond. She let go with her left hand and dangled in the darkness. "Damn it, you'd have done it already if you meant it." She smiled. "Been told that before." She looked down at the river below and felt its cold thrum on her feet. Wells could hear the distant sirens of an ambulance. She closed her eyes and counted down from 5 in her mind. Wells leaned down over the edge and grabbed her right wrist. She screamed out in pain as he hoisted her up over the edge with the fiery vigor of adrenaline. The strobe of the approaching ambulance painted the scene crimson as she struck the pavement deck of the bridge. Wells wrapped her up in a bear hug and searched for pockets. She had none. No identification. No money. She wrestled for a few seconds before resigning to her fate. She resolutely looked at the steely fog of the night above as paramedics began to poke and prod her. Her name was Stacy Green, but she made them find that out through fingerprints taken hours later. She wouldn't say a word to any of the attending officers. Officials put her on a gurney and wrapped her in blankets. As they loaded her onto an ambulance, she saw Wells and a throng of police. "Hey!" The crowd turned to look at her. "You might have rescued me. You didn't save me," she said. Wells winced as the words cut through the night air. She disappeared behind the threshold of the ambulance bay. News Channel 2 arrived for a B-roll shot. Police cars remained at the scene for hours. Wells was being spoken to, but he wasn't really listening. He couldn't shake the image of a pillow before his face, softened with sweat and saliva, the hard barrel of a gun to the back of his head, wielded by an invisible evil force far larger than himself. He could feel the cold rust of the Woodland Street bridge on his hands. He also couldn't deny the memory of his own encounters with cruelty, decades prior yet buried in the streambed of his memories. He took a moment at the base of the bridge to compose himself before heading back to the station. The Daybreak news segment wanted to film an interview at 5 a.m., according to Rawlings. He watched a coal train slowly clatter across the Cumberland, 101 cars in total, unceremoniously slithering into downtown along familiar tracks. Chapter 13. In the summer of 2014, a Metro Davidson County Transportation Authority intern named Katie Powell was tasked with reviewing the city's transportation-related asset management files in preparation for the request for proposals for a capital improvement plan, or CIP, project that would touch nearly every major roadway in Metro Nashville. This was a $17 million contract that spanned almost 7 years, with the anticipated CIP sequenced, prioritized, and costed to be delivered in August of 2023. These numbers dazzled Katie. She had decided to list her name as Catherine on her resume and use her boyfriend's mailing address to avoid the possibility of her superiors knowing the innocuous fact that she still lived in the dorms as a rising senior at Middle Tennessee State University. Katie's primary task was to review Metro's Geographic Information Systems databases, or GIS, for null or blank values, and then populate them with available data based on aerial mapping, previous versions of the database, or other fields in the database such as description, block number, or intersection. This was absolutely intern work. According to the Object ID field, which is what GIS uses as an automatically assigned number to make sure that each feature is indexed and has at least something as a unique identifier, there were nearly 35,000 streets, roads, lanes, avenues, and courts to review. This task took Katie most of the summer to get through. After the first couple of weeks, she started making a list of the fun names she came across. Flower Power Street or Milk Dud Way, for instance. There were tons of these things, and it was fun to tell her fellow interns, Malachi and Courtney, when she'd found a new one. By Friday, August 8th, she had reduced the number of critical entries, those that were missing a street name of any type, to 55. After a brief meeting with her supervisor in which she explained how completely out of options she'd become when trying to give these streets a name, she gained permission to group the remaining line features and assign them names based on their only unique identifier in the database, the Object ID field. She did this by highlighting the 55 entries, opening field calculator, and typing bracket street underscore name bracket equals bracket object ID bracket plus road. From that point on, the alley behind the Belmead Kroger was known as 235 Road. Several CSX rights-of-way became something like 8,777 Road and 10,476 Road. The calculation took a third of a second. One late August day, Wren was sitting in stopped traffic on Ellington Parkway near the Cleveland Street exit. She had her left leg up in her lap, anxiously judging the idle cars before her, reading bumper stickers and speculating about the quirks of the drivers ahead. Cyclist, churchgoer, animal lover, CrossFitter, honor student, University of Tennessee. She slowly crept into the shade of the Spring Street overpass and ground to a stop. With a row of red brake lights in front of her, she dug out her moleskin. Number 55 is the first page displayed, begun November 30th, 2015, and left for months in the outside pocket of her backpack until discovered after a flight. And she began to take notes. Keep Christ in Christmas. Leaper's Fork crawfish boil. Men lingering under the bridge. Guy looks like a broke-ass Wayne Gretzky. Detour Hotel? In huge black letters. Mark Twain would have been a drifter. Why do they hate being human? Number 17, write and recollection and amazement for yourself. Number 23, keep track of every day, the date emblazoned in your morning. 30 days has September, April, June, November. Today, Detour Hotel. Chapter 14. Constellation is a DIY arts and music venue near the intersection of Dickerson Pike and Trinity Lane in East Nashville. It inhabits the back third of a weedy lot between a White Castle and a brick cottage from the 40s that's been converted into a property management office. The telephone pole out front is a rusty mess of staples left over from Lost Dog posters and show bills. A speed limit sign is lying on the ground between the sidewalk and the road. The wider panorama of Dickerson Pike is that of sagging trailer parks and body shops, diners, fast food joints, and billboards advocating for solutions to human trafficking. For lease signs are common. Folks that grew up in Nashville might politely tell you that they haven't been over there recently. Hotels advertise color TV. Murals get painted over. It's the intersection of two worlds. Trinity Lane, its perpendicular counterpart, is a thoroughly gentrified stretch of county government buildings and new development, an unfolding east-west tendril of breweries, condos, and boutique stores. Lots are being auctioned 3 at a time for major apartment complexes. On the front door of Constellation is painted, "In the skyline of hell, there are no fire escapes." The venue's events are often shared via hastily made Instagram promos with set lists of sad boy trap DJs or punk bands mashed together on a lo-fi show bill featuring a mad lib of the following terms: all ages, free show, benefit show, EP release, solo set, and so on. There isn't an online calendar of events. There's only a social media account. Constellation has an orbit of stylish hooligans that also promote the venue by professionally living there. The parking lot is a dirty white battlefield of crushed marl. There's a sign on each bathroom that says, "All your genders are belong to us," in caps. A white plastic folding table is permanently on merch duty. 3 of the 4 walls are neon green, and the 4th is pasted with gabardine and features a spray-painted depiction of a jackalope. Wren has spent 47 of her last 96 hours at Constellation, creating an art piece for the spring show. Each artist is to submit a 100-square-foot piece for the installatrix. Lee Silver, a notoriously opinionated journalist from the local arts and music rag No Longer Nashville, is currently interviewing Wren and her cohorts. One of Silver's recent hot takes, that neoliberal capitalism is exploiting nostalgia to a point in which classical irony and abstract thought are no longer required in modern society, was rebutted by dozens of internet commenters with variations on the theme of adults wearing Halloween costumes had little to do with toxic neoliberal conformity and might just be, God forbid, fun. The article focusing on Constellation will be a 6-page photo spread with a sassy lead-in that is being discussed as simultaneously huge for the Northish East Nashville arts community and a death knell for the shit heap authenticity that gives the whole thing a sense of poetic urgency. Rin's just explained this in so many words to Silver. Are you worried about the exposure? Silver asked. Any of my apprehension has to do with my lack of confidence in my installation. I don't want to speak for everyone else. Silver raised an eyebrow and jotted notes on a stenopad. This is it, right? How does your installation work? She approached the desk-sized box. It resembled a cocktail cabinet arcade game. Underlying the flat top surface were many dimensions of etched strata lit from the side by LED bulbs. On each side of the device were knobs, jacks, and wires. There was also a cup holder. Rin grabbed a keyboard from the floor behind the installation and showed it to Silver. The idea is that when you touch each key, a different layer in the strata lights up, and you can create these three-dimensional textures through music. You could either play a tune that's intended to make a certain topographic feature, or it could just be like total chaos. The keyboard wheel modulates the pitch just like you think it would. Rin demonstrated the wheel's function. Pre-recorded music is even crazier. You could use natural sounds like the sound of rain or wolves howling, or you could play already composed music. Depending on the sounds, it makes some really intense mountains or valleys. I want it to seem like something someone's already seen but they can't figure out where. Liminal landscapes. Right on. Is that what it's called? Silver asked. A couple of artists were milling around and being nosy. No, it should be, though. It's called Fata Morgana. I don't like saying it, I'm sorry. Rin looked at the ground and shrunk with involuntary modesty. Does that mean something in Latin? Silver asked. Fata Morgana is an illusion caused by looking across long stretches of water. A mirage, essentially, but it's based on something that's truly out at sea, distorted by the curvature of the earth. It's lame, I know. No, it's cool. I could say I learned something today, Silver replied. Rin ran her fingers along the plexiglass surface of Fata Morgana. She closed her eyes for a second and found the bravery to explain the tangle of feelings that she had about the piece. I kind of want to see if it responds differently to different people, or differently to the same input from me. If it can continually create unique output, does it know who I am? Does it remember me? Does that make sense? I'm not sure, Silver replied. Rin scratched her nose and continued. I want to make sure that I can have repeatable experiences, and that others are experiencing the same thing that I am. If you or I put the same inputs into this organ, does that... I've always been slightly obsessed with subjectivity. Does this object present the same experience to you as it does to me? She asked. Silver smiled and looked around at the other artists. I don't think that we all see the same color orange, if that's what you're getting at, Silver said. Rin shook her head and continued. I'm not certain that I get the same experience every time from Fata Morgana. I guess that's the beauty of it, though. You can say that about every piece of art. Art is fleeting. I sound like an asshole. The loitering band of artists shared a laugh. I think that when you make art, you have to admit your truth. You don't have to fully understand what you're doing. That's all that's important. Admit your truth. I agree completely. Rin turned the power on for the exhibit. Do you want to try it out? The journalist coyly looked about the crowd. How? Play a tune on the keyboard, or you can plug your phone into the aux jack, Rin told her. She picked up the cord and shook it around before her. Silver blushed as she fished around in her pocket and produced her phone. Rin continued to shake the aux jack. I'm almost embarrassed to play what I was just listening to. Oh, now you have to play it. What was it? Rin asked as she adjusted the knobs on Fata Morgana. I was listening to Beyonce. I'd be embarrassed about being embarrassed about that. Silver pressed play and watched the features of Fata Morgana dance to life. The deep hollow pinball machine aesthetic pulsated to the music, the black matte background softly lit with colorful wireframe greens, blues, and reds. She and Rin were illuminated with the glow of the unit below them as they took in the chaos. Good tune. Certain repetitions make it easy to understand what's happening. Do you know when this article's gonna run? May issue, most likely, Silver replied. Rin unplugged the phone from Fata Morgana and handed it to Silver. She couldn't look away from the display as she struggled to tuck her notepad into her WPLN tote bag. "You have amazing handwriting," Rin told her. Silver shook the tote bag to settle the contents. "It's hard for me to make each letter the same way every time. My boyfriend says that I write like a serial killer," Silver said. "I know exactly what you mean." Silver forced a smile and hoisted the bag over her shoulder. Rin flicked a toggle switch back and forth on Fata Morgana. "I hope you all get a great turnout," Silver announced. The throng dispersed to their installation stations and went back to work as Silver found the owners of Constellation and wrapped up the interview. The worn-out jackalope stencil continued to stand vigil over Constellation's cinderblock confines as the afternoon brightened. Amid the clutter and bangs of cooped-up artists, Rin poked away at the keys on Fata Morgana and narrowed her eyes at the output.
On the next Detour Hotel.
Gordo walked over and pawed through Kevin's hoodie pocket. There was a pill bottle with no label. 2 pills left. Gordo brought them close to his face to investigate. Probably oxy from what he could tell. He put the bottle back in Kevin's pocket.
Detour Hotel is written, recorded, and produced by me, Aaron Rogge, in rainy Nashville, Tennessee. Additional music by Lee Rosevere, Airglow, and Soft and Furious, licensed under Creative Commons 3.0. This work is adapted from a novel of the same name by the same person and is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or occurrences is a coincidence. Paperback and Kindle versions of Detour Hotel are available on Amazon. Thanks for listening.